On the 26th of July, 1983, police in Vero Beach, Florida, responding to an emergency call, surrounded a local home. In the garage, they found a pool of blood and the victim of a brutal attack.
The state of emotions quickly changed. At that point in time, we knew we had something very serious. Shotguns started coming out of the trunk. Emotions started becoming charged.
The detectives soon realized they were dealing with a prolonged crime spree, one involving a string of abductions, rapes, and murders.
I knew that it would be a matter of time before he got hungry and started his routine again.
It was a horrible case. Still stands as the worst case I've heard of.
As well as the police, others also chronicled the investigation, on film, on paper, and on tape. Through their lenses, they captured the story of the killing cousins. In the United States, as many as 2,000 people are reported missing each day. In most cases, the missing person soon turns up unharmed, much to the relief of their families. But on rare occasions, foul play is involved, sometimes even abduction and murder. 1981. Vero Beach, Florida is a coastal resort by the Atlantic Ocean. Situated in a prime orange-growing region of the state, the town is known for its relaxed, laid-back atmosphere.
Well, the crime rate here was below normal. Probably most of our cases were drug cases and, you know, your regular Saturday night brawls. Very few murders.
Originally from Taiwan, the Ling family had recently moved to Vero Beach. 57-year-old Pu Ling worked as an inspector at a fruit packing factory.
Mr. Ling originally came alone to set up the family here in Vero Beach. So he was here for quite a while and was probably more acclimated to the American culture. And then later his wife and son and daughter came to Vero. They came from Taiwan to you know, a different country, different culture. It was a big adjustment period for them.
On the 19th of February 1981 at 2:45 p.m., Pu Ling left for work, where he was scheduled to do an evening shift. His wife, Shang Huang Ling, stayed at home, awaiting the return of their children from school. At 3 p.m., 17-year-old Ying Hua Ling followed her normal routine, catching the school bus home.
The bus stop was about a half a mile from the residence, so she would be dropped off at the bus stop and then walk about a half a mile on a dirt road down to her house. There were not a lot of residents that lived in the area. It was a lonely walk to her house.
At some point, a vehicle approached her, and her life took a fateful turn. At 4 p.m., 12-year-old Su Tao Ling, who attended a different school to his sister, arrived home. Although the front door was open, calls to both his mother and sister went unanswered.
His mother had just arrived from Taiwan, so he thought that she may have been out walking or in the groves nearby. After a while, with them not returning, then he'd become worried.
He spent
several hours around there, not knowing what to do. That night, when they still had, no one had returned, he finally went to a neighbor.
The neighbor tracked down Sue Tao's father at work. Detectives soon arrived and surveyed the scene. All signs suggested that the mother and daughter had not planned to leave for an extended period of time.
I went to the house. Mrs. Ling's purse, all of her luggage, personal items were all still in the house. The daughter's book bag was right next to the front door. Right inside the door was a vacuum cleaner that was still plugged into the wall, and right in the middle of the room, as if someone was vacuuming them in, and they were just walked out of the house or taken out of the house.
We all helped search for them. We had no idea where they went. We had figured that there was something drastically wrong, that something happened to them.
With foul play a possibility, a forensic expert dusted for prints and captured the home on film. While there were no signs of a struggle inside, potential drag marks in the driveway possibly suggested a forcible abduction. By the following morning, a missing persons report, along with photographs of Mrs. Ling and her daughter, had been circulated to police across the state. But as days became weeks, the police found no new clues as to the mother and daughter's whereabouts.
To just totally go missing and not be found, that would be an uncommon situation here in our area.
The 15th of July, 1981. Not long after the mysterious disappearance of the Lings, a 35-year-old woman named Judy K. Daly packed her car for the beach. Judy's two young daughters and one of their friends were also going on the day trip.
They wanted to go to one of the local beaches there in the city where all the kids hang out, and obviously, so she dropped them off there and told them that she would pick them back up at a certain time that afternoon. Then she went on down to another public beach away from the mainstream.
While Judy relaxed on the quiet beach, a figure watched her from a distance before quietly approaching her parked car and opening the bonnet.
She was on the beach area, started watching her clock, thought it was about time to pick her daughter up, went up to her car and went to start her car, and the car wouldn't start.
Judy K. Daly was reported missing when she failed to pick up her children that afternoon. When the police located her car, they found the engine had been disabled, suggesting foul play.
We felt very strongly that something was wrong. This wasn't somebody that had just left on their own accord.
In many ways, the scene was similar to what they'd found at the Ling home a few months earlier.
All her beach equipment was there in the car, and similar to the way the Lings were taken from the scene, with all their personal items there inside the house. We have someone missing, and looked like they were just taken from a location.
Judy's car was photographed and dusted for prints, but no evidence was found of a possible abductor.
We started investigating, and we started interviewing a lot of beachgoers.
I remember we spent an awful lot of time looking for her, walking some of the areas over there where the underbrush and trails and roads led either to the ocean or to the river, trying to find any sign of her.
News of Judy's disappearance shocked Vero Beach residents. In the space of just a few months, 3 Vero Beach women seemed to have vanished into thin air.
A small community, very close-knit community. A lot of people were very uneasy.
The police would soon get a fresh lead in the case, raising fears that the peaceful resort community was now the hunting ground of a homegrown serial killer. In July 1981, in Vero Beach, Florida, police were investigating two different missing persons cases. Xiang Huang Ling and her 17-year-old daughter had mysteriously vanished from their home, while 35-year-old Judy K. Daly had disappeared while sunbathing at a nearby beach.
At that point now, the Ling case, that was about 6 months previous to Judy K. Daly. We suspected foul play in that case, so we're also looking at a possible connection between the Ling case and the Daly case now.
While still searching for the three missing women, detectives uncovered their first potential lead. It involved a bizarre incident that had taken place not far from the beach where Judy K. Daly had gone missing. Just 1 month earlier, an 18-year-old woman driving near the beach had been stopped by a deputy from the local sheriff's department. He informed her that a robbery had been reported in the area and that she was a suspect. Although she insisted she'd committed no crime, the officer explained that her vehicle was a perfect match for one spotted at the scene.
The deputy told her that he wanted her to go back to the area to try to be identified by witnesses.
Although sensing something was wrong, she agreed to cooperate and followed him in her own car. Then the officer unexpectedly turned off and left the main road.
She became very concerned. She thought she was going back to be ID'd as possibly be involved in a crime, and all of a sudden they turn off on a dirt road and end up in a very isolated area.
The road ended near a river. The officer seemed surprised to find people fishing in the normally abandoned spot.
He became panicked, and she became very, very uneasy when this happened. His whole demeanor had changed, and now he acted very scared and sweating and nervous and wanted her to get out of there. Gave her driver's license back and told her that the witnesses that were supposed to identify her as part of the robbery were not there, that she could go ahead and return home.
Finding the officer's behavior suspicious, the young woman, accompanied by her father, went to the local sheriff's office later that day.
They come in the office and took a statement. She was very, very shaken up and very rattled.
She was shown photographs of officers who might have been in the area. She quickly singled out one in particular, a 27-year-old local man named David Gore. A married man with 2 young sons, Gore did maintenance work in the orange groves around town. But he also volunteered as an auxiliary deputy with the sheriff's department. Although he wore a uniform, he was not allowed to pull people over without another officer present. In addition, no robbery had been reported in the area on the morning the woman was stopped.
When he was called in and interviewed, he didn't really have a good reason for stopping her. He didn't have a really good reason for not communicating with the 911 system that he had stopped anyone, and didn't have a good reason for taking her down an isolated road.
In light of the incident, Gore was stripped of his badge. Now, 1 month later, with Judy K. Daly having disappeared along the same stretch of road, his name came up again. Adding to their suspicions, the police discovered that Gore had often been spotted at the beach Daly had been sunbathing on.
We questioned him, of course, denied, said he knew nothing about it. He said, yeah, I was at the beach. And he says, I go check the water all the time, see what the waves are, and, what it looks like.
Examining Gore's background more closely, the police discovered another incident that alarmed them. 4 years earlier, a woman had alleged that David Gore and a cousin of his had taken her into the orange groves and raped her. Although neither Gore nor his cousin had been convicted of the crime, it suggested a potentially violent streak in a man now regarded as a possible suspect in the missing persons cases. Suspicions about Gore were about to grow deeper. On the 21st of July, 1981, just over a week after the disappearance of Judy Kay Daly, a 23-year-old woman left a Vero Beach medical complex.
As she was walking up to her car, she seen what appeared to be some kind of a movement in the back seat of her vehicle.
When she saw this, she screamed.
It appeared that someone was in there.
It just so happened one of the sheriff's deputies was also coming out of the building about the same time and heard her scream.
She went with him over to her vehicle, pointed out her vehicle. He also observed that there was someone in the back seat of the car, told him to come out. He didn't come out. At that time, he pulled his weapon, drew his weapon, and ordered the person out of the car.
Get out of the car now!
A few seconds later, the man emerged. It was none other than David Allen Gore.
He had no shirt on. He had a drink in his hand, a mixed drink. It had alcohol in it.
In Gore's possession, police found a gun and a pair of handcuffs.
He had things with him that would lead us to believe that he was going to abduct her.
As for why he was hiding in the woman's car, Gore explained that he'd been secretly following his estranged wife and son, whom he claimed were also visiting the medical complex when he suddenly needed a place to hide.
My wife was supposed to be here with my son. I was just, here to keep an eye on her, but I didn't want her to see me, so she pulled in the parking lot, so I just got in this car and was hiding.
But the weapon and handcuffs convinced the officer at the scene otherwise.
He didn't put a lot of faith in what he had said. He went ahead and placed him in the back of the car, arrested him, took him in the office. They had contacted his ex-wife, and she said that she had no appointment at all to be at the doctor's clinic or to have the son there for any kind of a treatment.
Gore was convicted of armed trespassing and given a short prison sentence, with a chance of parole after 1 year. Although the police still had no evidence tying him to the recent missing persons cases, he'd now gone from a person of interest to the prime suspect. With the news that he'd been jailed for hiding in a woman's car, other people came forward with similar unsettling stories.
When David Gore got arrested, we got some phone calls from a couple of girls, and we went out to their businesses and we interviewed them together. And they would have come out from the beach and find their car disabled. And all of a sudden, David Gore would walk out or walk up to their vehicle and he would show them a badge. He says, well, I'm a deputy sheriff. He said, I'll be glad to take you to go get some help.
The women had declined Gore's offer, but the police believed that this was probably the same tactic he'd used on missing Judy Kay Daly. If they were right, they needed to find hard evidence against Gore before he was released from prison. With the help of a search warrant, the police obtained the vehicle Gore had often used while working in the orange groves. It was taken to a regional crime lab where it was scrutinized carefully by a forensic expert.
We're going to start with photographs. Photograph everything in every angle that we can, using whatever lighting we can to make sure that everything is illuminated. From there, you're going to go through and look for obvious items.
No traces of blood or victims' fingerprints were found, but there was a potential clue underneath the dashboard.
Where there's a radio underneath the dashboard, like a two-way radio, and they found 2 hairs that was stuck in the little bracket that holds the radio.
DNA testing was not then available, so experts visually compared the hairs with samples taken from hairbrushes supplied by the missing women's families. The hairs found in David Gore's truck appeared to match those belonging to the missing Xiang Huangling and her 17-year-old daughter. But while this confirmed police suspicions, without a more complete sample, and indeed a victim's body to compare them with, the evidence would hold little weight in court. At the same time, detectives began approaching members of Gore's family, looking for any information related to the missing women. One of those approached was Gore's charismatic cousin, Fred Waterfield. Although they had very different personalities, the police knew the two men had shared a close bond since childhood.
His cousin was a year or two older, very popular in school, was very athletic, was on the football team.
He would just talk like he was astonished and everything that David had gotten caught in the back of a car. Astonished with what David had done and with the pattern that David had turned out.
But the police heard a more chilling story from David Gore's estranged wife. In light of his recent arrest, an incident that had occurred about the time of Judy Kay Daly's disappearance now seemed far more ominous.
She said that he'd come home that one day, walked in the house, and when he walked in, he had blood on his shirt. And she had questioned him about the origin of the blood and how it happened, and he said that he was out hunting, shot an animal, and there was, that's how he got blood on his shirt, and kind of fluffed it off.
In March 1983, David Gore was released from prison, having served a short sentence for armed trespassing. With no bodies and no evidence of murder, the police were powerless to keep him behind bars. In the days that followed, detectives put their prime suspect in the disappearances under constant watch.
Well, we kept a tight surveillance on the house right after his release. He was released to his parents. He was living with his parents.
But a lack of evidence soon forced them to keep their distance.
His mother, like I say, he lived with his parents, filed several complaints against me that I was harassing her son. Since I couldn't arrest him, then they did not want me near him. So I was asked to back off, and it was like a restraining order, you know, to keep me away from him.
David Gore soon had the freedom to move around undetected.
I knew that it would be a matter of time before he got hungry and started his routine again.
July 1983. For children in Vero Beach, summer holidays were well underway. Like many of her classmates, Lynn Elliott was enjoying the warm weather and the break from school.
A normal 17-year-old high school teenager, very well liked by her friends. Lynn Elliott lived on the beach with her family.
We were the only house down there, and we had our own little paradise down there. It was just a beautiful place to live. We had our own boat. Kids could swim when they wanted to. It was a beautiful family. It really was. She was my only daughter. At that time, I owned a TV repair shop. She used to work for me in the TV shop part-time. We'd go to the beach. That was one of our most favorite things, you know?
The 26th of July was a hot summer's day. Lynn Elliott met up with her 14-year-old friend Reagan. Hoping to spend the afternoon at a popular beach a short drive away, the two decided to hitchhike.
That was the first time they ever tried it. It was just a lark. It was something to do. If I'd have known about it, I would have stopped her, but you know, kids are trusting. They really are.
Before long, a vehicle stopped to give them a ride. At 3 p.m. back in Vero Beach, A 14-year-old boy was riding his bike along a quiet road when he suddenly heard screams and a gunshot. Seconds later, he saw a blindfolded woman trying to make her way towards the road with a man in close pursuit.
Both of them were running down the driveway. He fired one shot. She fell by the side of the driveway. He saw him walk up, stand over her, and take his gun and shoot her again, and then try to drag her back to the house.
Detective Sergeant Phil Redstone was in his car when he heard the first report of the skirmish.
Right then, I just had a funny feeling of what the address was going to be.
According to the call, the shooting incident had taken place in front of David Gore's home.
I mean, my worst fears come to light that we're going to have another case.
On the 26th of July 1983, the police responded to an emergency call in a residential part of Vero Beach, Florida. A shooting had been witnessed outside the home of David Gore, the prime suspect in the disappearance of 3 local women. Although the police still had no evidence against him, they feared a dangerous man might have struck again.
Initially, myself and 2 uniformed patrol officers were the first ones to arrive shortly after we got the call. Went in down to the driveway, set up in front of the house, called some additional units to set up a perimeter around the house.
As the police watched for any sign of movement, another emergency call came in. A second local resident had seen a man chasing a woman, but this time the sighting was 4 blocks east of the Gore home. A few officers drove off to follow the fresh lead, only to learn moments later the true nature of the second call.
We didn't get very far before the dispatch was able to determine that the additional call sending us east was actually coming from back where we had just come from.
He saw the police there. He was trying to divert the police away from his house so he could escape.
Although they had yet to see any signs of foul play, the police were now convinced that David Gore was inside his home, possibly armed and dangerous.
We were riding along there with the windows down and trying to listen for anybody screaming, any gunshots.
We tried to make contact with Gore inside the house to try to get him to come out. We tried calling back on the telephone. We used a loudspeaker from the patrol cars. And we tried knocking on the door. We couldn't get him to respond to us at all.
In the garage, police noticed fresh skid marks behind Gore's parked car. Seconds later, another discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears.
I just got down looking at the tire marks, and in the tire marks was a little small pool of blood. As I sat there watching it, I saw a drop fall from the trunk. At that point in time, I yelled out to the other officers, what I'd seen. And at that point in time, we pried the trunk open, literally forced it open. Once the trunk was open, there was a young female inside.
The body inside the boot belonged to 17-year-old Lynn Elliott, picked up hitchhiking only 2 hours earlier.
It was really an unnerving sight. I immediately checked to see if we could find a pulse, hoping that she was still alive, and didn't find a pulse. Knew that she was dead.
Her hands were bound behind her back, and she had a blindfold over her head. The state of emotions quickly changed. At that point in time, we knew we had something very serious. A shotgun started coming out of the trunk. Emotions started becoming charged.
With daylight fading, the police finally decided to move in.
We forced our way into one of the doors, sent officers in to secure the rooms. Once the entire interior of the house was secured, we heard a noise coming from the ceiling. Yelled into the attic for whoever was in there to come out. After a couple times, David Gore said that he was coming out, and he'd come out at that point in time, and he was taken into custody.
In the attic, the police found Lynn Elliott's 14-year-old friend Reagan, bound and in shock, but still alive. Forensics expert David Cuddy went to the Gore home to preserve the scene on film and help search for evidence.
The whole area outside, from all perspectives, was photographed. Went into the residence and photographed areas they had been involved in, the access to the attic, and areas that he had held the girls in that they knew about, and of course the vehicle and Lynn Elliott's body.
The police soon found the murder weapon.
Underneath one of the cushions of the couch, we had found a handgun. From the condition of the handgun, it appeared that it had been recently fired.
Across town, Lynn's parents were told the tragic news about their daughter.
And when the guy came to my house to tell me all about it, tell me that she was dead, and it was chaos. It was hell. Shocked. Completely shocked. Just couldn't believe it. This is really happening to me, you know? Couldn't believe it. To us, yeah. Yeah. And it was chaos from then on.
Lynn was raised, and she was raised with values, and she was always taught that not everybody is a good person. And she made a wrong decision, and it cost her her life.
Back at the police station, the day's tragic events were becoming clearer. 14-year-old Reagan explained how she and Lynn Elliott had been picked up and taken to Gore's house at gunpoint. There, they were sexually assaulted before Lynn's desperate attempt to escape down the driveway. For the police, Reagan's account contained an unexpected revelation. David Gore wasn't acting alone. David Gore also implicated an accomplice. The man in question was none other than his cousin Fred Waterfield, whom Gore claimed had left the house shortly before the police arrived. Officer Phil Williams brought Fred Waterfield into the station for questioning.
There was something in his demeanor that looked worried as we drove to the detective division.
At a police identity parade, Reagan picked out Gore and Waterfield as the two men who'd abducted and assaulted her and her friend. Later, the boy who'd witnessed Lynn's shooting singled out Gore as the man who'd pulled the trigger. The police would soon learn the details of a crime spree far worse than they'd imagined, and involving more victims than the missing women from Vero Beach. The 27th of July, 1983. In Vero Beach, Florida, the police had arrested David Allen Gore and his cousin Fred Waterfield in connection with the abduction, sexual assault and murder of 17-year-old Lynn Elliott, as well as the abduction and sexual assault of her 14-year-old friend Reagan. News of the crime shook the resort community.
That sent a shockwave through Vero Beach. Both had been raped. It's likely that the second one would have died if the police hadn't gotten there when they did.
Both men initially denied involvement in the other cases involving missing local women. But David Gore, faced with hard evidence against him in the shooting of Lynn Elliott, eventually began to weaken.
He knew we were seeking the death penalty in the Elliott case. And we suspected he was involved in 3, 4, 5, we didn't know how many other deaths. And his lawyer came and said, if he leads you to where the other bodies are and admits to the killing of those girls, will you not seek the death penalty on those cases? So naturally we agreed to that because we already had one that was a strong death penalty case.
Sometimes you have to deal with the devil.
In a series of confessions, David Gore revealed the brutal truth behind a number of unsolved disappearances. He also revealed that his cousin, Fred Waterfield, was his long-standing partner in crime. He admitted to stalking 17-year-old Ying Hua Ling before abducting both her and her mother.
He had his police badge with him, and he convinced her that she was in trouble, and he wanted to take her to her house and explain the situation to her. And when he got there, he found that her mother was there, and so he ended up kidnapping both. And as he was leaving their house, he got on a phone and called his cousin, Fred Waterfield, and said, "I've got some for you."
According to Gore, the motive was sexual. The women were taken to a nearby orange grove where he and his cousin had raped and murdered them. Waterfield continued to protest his innocence, but Gore alleged that his cousin was the main instigator of the attacks, paying Gore a cash bounty of sorts for each woman he'd managed to abduct.
Was supposedly the mastermind behind this, according to David, that he would prompt David to do these kidnappings and abductions.
As the police had suspected, Gore had also disabled Judy K. Daly's vehicle and waited for her to return from the beach, at which point he'd offered her a ride.
So he was able to get her in the car, started heading up the road, and pulled a gun on her, handcuffed her, and took her out to an isolated area west of town in the Grove area.
Gore also confessed that shortly after his release from prison, he and Fred Waterfield had gone on a road trip. On it, they'd picked up, raped, and killed 2 teenage hitchhikers, subsequently identified as Barbara Bayer and Angelica LaValle, reported missing from Orlando.
They would go out on hunting expeditions for girls. It was sort of like your mother always told you, don't hitchhike. And several of the people that they attacked were hitchhikers.
Looking for hard evidence to back up Gore's confessions, the police began excavations in the orange groves around Vero Beach. In one spot, they dug up 2 55-gallon barrels that contained the dismembered remains of the 2 Ling women. In a later search, the police found the skull of Judy K. Daly.
He decapitated her, buried her head in the orange grove, and took her body and threw it in the canal so the alligators could get it.
On the 6th of March 1984, David Gore faced trial on the initial charges of the murder of Lynn Elliott and the kidnapping and assault of her friend Reagan.
Reagan, from all accounts, was very, very brave. She's the one who survived, and she was the star witness in the case against both of them.
Gore showed little remorse throughout the proceedings.
Just sit there. No expression on his face. Hardly any expression. It's just like nothing affected him, you know?
He had the steeliest eyes. You know, you see these horror movies, and you look at people's eyes where they look red, clear, and you can see all the way like to the back of their eyes, the back of the retina. That's the way he looked. He was the strangest looking guy I ever saw. He looked like he came right out of a horror movie.
After a short trial, David Gore was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by electric chair.
When the verdict was read, I'm sure that the families, felt a sense of relief.
I felt great about that because he deserved the death penalty.
As part of a plea agreement for helping locate the bodies, Gore also pleaded guilty to the murders of Xiang Huang and Yinghua Ling, Judy K. Daly, Barbara Bayer, and Angelica LaValle. He received a life sentence for each murder. That spring, Gore's cousin Fred Waterfield also went to court to face murder charges in connection with the death of Lynn Elliott.
He was concerned with putting on a show for the jury. I'm an innocent man that couldn't possibly have done this.
He maintained it was all David, even in the Lynn Elliott case where he was identified, he said that he was never a part of any plan.
Waterfield escaped with only a manslaughter conviction for his role in the abduction of Lynn Elliott and Reagan. The police then used their strongest evidence to connect him to the other murder cases in a second trial. After denying taking the road trip entirely, an eyewitness account placed Waterfield near Orlando on the day Barbara Bayer and Angelica LaValle went missing. That, combined with his own cousin taking the stand against him, persuaded the jury. On top of his 15 years for manslaughter, he was convicted of 2 separate counts of first-degree murder and received 2 life sentences. In prison, he continued to protest his innocence, while Gore persisted in calling him the mastermind behind the crimes. Regardless, there was little doubt that one of Florida's worst killing sprees was the work of 2 men whose twisted relationship went back many years.
David was the bumpkin and didn't get along with people and was kind of off to himself, quiet, wanted to be like Freddie, followed Freddie around. They had developed over the years of growing up and working together, of working a good guy and a bad guy routine. Fred's role in the cases was to be the good guy. He would help with the lure and the talk. Then David always endeared his role as being the enforcer. And he was the bad guy, and he pulled the gun.
If not for Lynn Elliott's attempted escape, their terrifying attacks would probably have continued.
Chances are they would have never, ever been caught, and had Lynn Elliott not run down that road and tried to get away.
She did her part. She ended the whole thing anyway. A hell of a way to go, but she ended the whole thing. She was a beautiful young girl. And my only daughter. I'll just miss her the rest of my life. It never goes away.
You never get back what you've lost.
I love you, Lynn. And I miss you.
Still stands as the worst case I've heard of in Florida, and one of the worst cases I'd ever heard of. All the horror stories that your parents tell you to try to keep you safe came true with just these 2 men.